The rain in Chicago doesn't just fall, it punishes. It's a gray, oppressive curtain that turns the skyscrapers of the Loop into jagged steel ghosts. It was the kind of Tuesday that felt like a burial, cold, damp, and final. I stood on the sidewalk outside the glass and steel monolith of Sterling Vance Acquisitions, my fingers numbing around the edges of a soggy cardboard box. 10 years. I had given that building 3,650 days of my life. I had missed anniversaries, skipped my father's 75th birthday, and survived on 4 hours of sleep for the sake of Marcus Sterling's bottom line. I was the guy who stayed until the cleaning crew arrived. I was the one who found the errors in the quarterly audits that saved the firm millions. 10 minutes ago, I was the senior vice president of specialized accounts, or the man the board called the closer. Now I was just a guy with a wet box and a revoked keycard. My name is Elias Thorne. Marcus had looked me in the eye, the same eyes that had looked at me with brotherly affection at his beach house last summer, and told me I was no longer a cultural fit. He didn't mention that I'd just finished the grueling groundwork for a merger that would net him a 9-figure payout. He didn't have to. The pink slip resting on top of my stapler said it all. I felt the cold seep into my bones, that bitter metallic realization that loyalty is a currency no one accepts anymore. In the corporate world, you're only as good as the next decimal point. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Welcome to Family Secrets and Revenge. The drive back to Oak Park was a blur of taillights and rhythmic windshield wipers. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the blades felt like a countdown to a life I no longer recognized. I kept glancing at the passenger seat where my box sat like a small, pathetic monument to a dead career. A stapler, a Rolodex I hadn't used in years, a framed photo of my wife Elena smiling on a vintage mahogany boat in Amalfi. I remembered that trip. I had spent half of it on international conference calls while she tanned on the deck. I thought I was building a kingdom for us. Now I felt like a peasant being cast out of the gates. The suburbs usually felt like a sanctuary. The towering oaks, the colonial-style houses, the smell of freshly mulched gardens. Today, it felt like a gilded cage. I pulled into the driveway of our 4-bedroom Craftsman, a house that cost more than my parents made in a lifetime. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, the engine clicking as it cooled, the rain drumming a frantic beat on the roof. How do you walk inside and tell your wife that the pedestal you built for your life together just crumbled? Elena was a high-end interior designer. She lived for aesthetics, for the image of success. To her, a man's worth was tied to his title and the zip code he could afford. I was terrified that if I took away the paycheck, I'd be taking away the very reason she loved me. When I finally gathered the courage to walk inside, the house was eerily quiet. The scent of expensive lavender candles and vanilla hung heavy in the air, the smell of a life I could no longer afford. Mona Elena was in the kitchen, bathed in the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting. She was pouring a glass of chilled Chablis, her movements fluid and graceful. She looked perfect, as always, not a single blonde hair out of place, wearing a silk lounge set that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "You're early," she said. She didn't turn around. Her voice had a strange edge to it, a lightness that felt manufactured, like a script she had rehearsed. I stood there, my coat dripping on the hardwood floors she spent thousands to install. I couldn't do it. The words died in my throat. I couldn't bear to see the disappointment or, worse, the pity in her eyes. I made an excuse about a system-wide server crash at the firm giving everyone the afternoon off. I left my box of office supplies in the garage, hidden behind a stack of winter tires and old suitcases. That night, we ate a dinner of roasted sea bass in a silence that felt heavy, like the air right before a tornado hits. I watched her across the table and felt a surge of protective, desperate love. I promised myself I would fix this before she ever had to feel the sting of a bank balance hitting zero. I didn't know then that she was already looking for the exit. Wednesday morning, the charade continued. I woke up at my usual 6 a.m., showered, put on my best charcoal gray suit, and kissed Elena goodbye. I drove away from the house, but I didn't head toward the Loop. Instead, I drove to the edge of the city, to a place called the Greasy Spoon. It was a diner that smelled of old oil and desperation, the polar opposite of the mahogany row offices I was used to. And I was staring into a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt beans when Silas Vane slid into the booth across from me. Silas was a legend in the tech underground, a man with a genius IQ and a total disregard for corporate etiquette. He had been screwed over by Marcus Sterling years ago, and he never forgot a debt. "You look like hell, Elias," he said, a jagged grin splitting his face. He didn't ask if I'd been fired. He already knew. In the world of high finance, a firing is like blood in the water, and Silas was a shark that could smell it from miles away. He pushed a thick manila folder across the sticky table. "Sterling is trying to buy a logistics AI platform called Aegis for pennies on the dollar. The developers in London are brilliant, but they're being bullied by Marcus's legal team. They're desperate, and when their exclusivity window with Sterling Vance expires in exactly 72 hours, they need a shark who knows Marcus's playbook to help them pivot to a better offer." Silas leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial growl. "This isn't just a job, Elias. It's a heist. If you can facilitate this deal for the London group before the clock runs out on Friday, they've authorized a $15 million acquisition and consulting fee. And here's the kicker. Since Sterling fired you without a severance package or a signed exit interview, your non-compete is legally toothless regarding independent consultancy for foreign entities." I looked at the folder. My heart was thumping in my ears like a war drum. It was a suicide mission. If I failed, Marcus would use his billion-dollar legal team to bury me under a mountain of lawsuits. But if I won, I wouldn't just be back on my feet. I'd be standing on Marcus's neck. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you were in Elias's shoes, facing a situation like this, would you risk everything on a secret deal? Or would you start looking for a new 9-to-5? Share your thoughts in the comments. The co-working space Silas had secured was a graveyard for failed startups. It smelled of ozone, burnt coffee, and the desperate sweat of men who had bet their last dollar on a line of code. I sat in a corner booth, the stuffing coming out of the vinyl seat, with 3 different laptops open. One was for the London encrypted line, one was for monitoring Sterling Vance's public filings, and the third was my personal machine, where I was drafting the Thorne protocol, my blueprint for the $15 million acquisition. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Elena, my heart skipped a beat. "Hey, honey, are you coming home for dinner? Marcus mentioned he might need you for a late-night strategy session." I stared at the screen. Marcus had mentioned it? Since when did my boss discuss my schedule with my wife? I brushed it off as corporate chatter, a lie I told myself to keep the focus on the numbers. I was pulling 18-hour shifts. I learned the names of every board member in London. I wasn't just a consultant. I was their therapist, their shield, and their shark. I walked them through the Sterling trap, a clause Marcus used in every contract that allowed him to seize intellectual property if a milestone was missed by even an hour. "He's not buying your company," I told them at 2 a.m., my eyes bloodshot and stinging. "He's colonizing it. If you sign his current offer, you'll be out of a job and stripped of your patents by Christmas. But if you follow my lead, we're going to use his own exclusivity window against him." I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of my old life while building a new one out of pure, concentrated spite. It was Thursday night, the final hurdle. The London board was terrified. Marcus had sent them a formal intent to litigate notice, a classic bullying tactic. I sat in that dark warehouse, the blue light of the laptop screen etching deep lines into my face. I had to convince them that Marcus was bluffing. I spent 4 hours walking them through Sterling Vance's internal liquidity reports I had authored. "Donnie, he doesn't have the cash flow to sustain a 3-year international lawsuit," I told the lead developer. "He needs your AI to save his own firm from a margin call. If you sign with me now, the $15 million wire will be initiated before he even opens his email tomorrow morning. You won't just be safe, you'll be rich." By 4 a.m., the digital ink was dry. The deal was done. Friday afternoon, the sun actually broke through the Chicago clouds. I sat in a high-end cafe, watching my bank portal. Then it happened. A series of notifications that felt like a lightning strike. The wire transfers were hitting. $15 million. After Silas took his finder's fee, I was looking at a net worth that made my previous salary look like pocket change. I didn't go home immediately. I went to Michigan Avenue. I walked into a boutique jeweler and bought a diamond tennis bracelet, the one Elena had sighed over in a magazine 6 months ago. It was breathtaking, 20 carats of pure light. I wanted tonight to be the grand reveal. I was going to tell her I was fired, then show her the check, then give her the diamonds. We were going to start a new life. The drive back to Oak Park felt like a victory lap. I was rehearsing the speech in my head. Elena, I have something to tell you. We're never going to worry again. But as I turned the corner onto our street, the air in my lungs turned to ice. Parked directly in front of my house, blocking my own driveway, was a black Mercedes S-Class. It was a car I had seen every day for 10 years. It was polished to a mirror finish, its chrome accents glinting mockingly in the afternoon light. I knew the custom license plate by heart. M. Sterling. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Why was my former boss at my house? Had he found out about the London deal? My mind raced through a dozen corporate espionage scenarios. I parked 2 houses down, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest so far. The high of a $15 million victory, or the sickening sight of your enemy's car in your driveway? Share your thoughts in the comments. I walked up the stone path to my front door, my footsteps sounding like thunder in the unnerving silence of the afternoon. I didn't use the garage door. I wanted to walk through the front. It was unlocked. That was the first red flag that bypassed my brain and went straight to my gut. And Elena was obsessive about security. She once called the police because a delivery driver walked too close to the side window. I stepped into the foyer. The house was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence of an empty home. It was the heavy, charged atmosphere of a crime scene. I saw Marcus's Italian leather loafers tossed carelessly near the mahogany coat rack, the same rack I'd spent a weekend assembling while Marcus was at his country club. My heart began a slow, painful thud against my ribs. I walked past the kitchen, where a half-empty bottle of my vintage scotch sat on the counter. I didn't stop. I walked toward the stairs, every step feeling like I was ascending a gallows. Then I heard it, a soft, melodic laugh, Elena's laugh. But it wasn't the laugh she gave me when I made a joke over breakfast. It was intimate, throaty, and followed by a man's low, self-satisfied murmur. He's such a bore, Marcus. Honestly, I don't know how I sat through 10 years of his corporate strategy talk and his pathetic little dreams. That was Marcus Sterling's voice, my boss, the man who had let me go 5 days ago to protect the firm's culture. I stood on the landing, the diamond bracelet box feeling like a hot coal in my pocket. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against the wall for support. They weren't just talking. They were celebrating my downfall in the very bed where I had promised to protect her forever. I pushed the door open. I didn't kick it. I didn't scream. I just nudged it with one trembling finger. The sight burned itself into my retinas like a solar eclipse. My wife, the woman I had spent all week saving from a life of struggle, Wayne was wrapped in the silk sheets I'd bought her for our anniversary. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the bed, a smug grin on his face. They froze. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Elena's eyes went wide, her face turning a ghostly shade of white as the wine glass in her hand tilted precariously. Marcus didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just looked annoyed that his afternoon delight had been interrupted by an inconvenience. "Elias," he said, setting the glass down with a clinical click, "you're home early. I thought you'd be at a job fair by now." "I'm early for the reckoning, it seems," I said. My voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that only comes when you have nothing left to lose. The rage had moved past the point of heat and turned into something crystalline, sharp and focused. Elena started to scramble, pulling a robe over her shoulders with shaking hands. "Elias, honey, it's not what it looks like. Marcus came over to discuss your severance. He wanted to do it in person to spare your feelings." "With his shoes off? In our bed? Sipping my scotch?" I looked at Marcus. And you? You fired me so you could have a clear shot at my wife? Or was that just the cherry on top of the merger? Marcus laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. Don't be dramatic, Elias. You were a tool, a useful one for a decade, but tools get replaced when they get dull. Elena just prefers the upgraded model with the bigger bank account. I pulled the London contract from my inner pocket. I also pulled out my phone and hit stop on the recording I'd started the moment I saw his car. You're right about one thing, Marcus. Tools do get replaced. I tossed the contract onto the foot of the bed. That's the Aegis acquisition. It's finalized, signed, sealed, and the funds, all 15 million of them, are already sitting in my private account. You lost the merger, you lost the platform, and by the end of the week, you're going to lose your reputation. Marcus's eyes scanned the document, his pupils dilating as he realized it. As the reality hit him, his smug expression crumbled like wet ash. He knew the numbers. He knew that without Aegis, Sterling Vance was a hollow shell, over-leveraged and bleeding cash. Look at it, Marcus. That's the sound of a man who no longer needs a cultural fit. That's the sound of a man who just bought your future and threw it in the trash. Elena tried to step toward me, her hand outstretched, but her voice a wavering, practiced instrumental of sorrow. Elias, honey, we can fix this. You're rich now. We can go away. We can leave all this drama behind. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she didn't see a husband. She saw a bigger pile of gold than the one Marcus was sitting on. If you were in Elias's shoes, standing in your own bedroom, facing this level of betrayal, what would be your first move? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to see how you would handle this. Get out, I said. It wasn't a shout, it was a death sentence. Marcus tried to muster some of his old corporate bravado, standing up and reaching for his pants. This is still half her house, Thorne. You can't just throw me out of... Actually, I interrupted, I checked the deed with my attorney this morning. Since I paid the down payment from my premarital inheritance, and you, Elena, haven't contributed a dime to the mortgage or the taxes in 3 years, you have until tomorrow morning to pack your bags. Marcus, you have 10 seconds before I call the police and report a trespasser who is currently being recorded. As Marcus scrambled to gather his things, tripping over his own expensive belt, I dropped the final bomb. Oh, and Marcus, I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands you used to hide the cultural fit bonuses from the board. I sent a digital packet of your encrypted ledgers to the SEC and the IRS an hour ago. I imagine they'll be waiting at your office by Monday morning. Marcus turned a shade of gray I didn't think was humanly possible. He didn't even look at Elena as he bolted out the door, his shirt half tucked. He didn't care about her. He only cared about his freedom. Elena stood there looking at me, realizing the upgraded model had just ditched her in the middle of a burning building. Elias, honey, please, we can talk about this. I was confused. I was lonely. I didn't mean any of it. I didn't stay to hear the rest of the lies. I walked downstairs, grabbed my box from the garage, and walked back to my car. I drove to the city and checked into the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, overlooking the lake. That night, I sat by the window and watched the lights of Chicago. I had $15 million. I had my freedom. And I had the cold, hard satisfaction of knowing that Marcus Sterling's empire was burning to the ground. Within a month, Marcus was under federal indictment for securities fraud. Now Sterling Vance acquisitions collapsed, and the board sued Marcus for every penny he had left. Elena tried to sue me for emotional distress and a portion of the Aegis deal. My legal team, the most expensive in the United States, crushed her in 3 days. Because I had been terminated before the deal was signed, it was ruled post-separation income. She ended up in a studio apartment above a laundromat, a far cry from the life she thought she'd stolen. Success is a powerful thing, but peace is better. I started my own firm, Thorne Strategic. I didn't hire based on culture fits or Ivy League pedigrees. I hired based on integrity and hunger. I found myself sitting in that same greasy diner a year later, but this time I wasn't the one looking for a job. I was the one providing them. Before we go deeper into the aftermath of this story, I want to thank you for watching. Life has a way of stripping you down to nothing right before giving you everything, and it's in those moments of betrayal that we find out who we truly are. If you enjoyed this story of justice and resilience, please hit that like button and subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge. Tell me, what part of my story hit you the hardest? Was it the betrayal in the bedroom or the $15 million comeback? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time.